correspondents in Rome, from journalists based in Brussels who are connected here, and from Italian journalists who are physically present here. So let's start with Bloomberg, Alessandro Speciale.
President von der Leyen, President Draghi, thank you. Today we have heard significant commitments from world leaders on vaccines, on funding for COVAX, on sharing tools to fight COVID-19. But how will you ensure that countries will make good on these pledges and in general that the principles of the Rome Declaration are upheld? And a second question, if I may. In your declaration, you pledged to promote the multilateral trading system within the WTO as key for the global production of vaccines. How will you avoid health protectionism, especially of cutting-edge technology in our ever more polarized world? Thank you.
Thank you. You want to start? I will start. What do you prefer?
Go ahead.
I go ahead. Okay. Well, the sort of commitment, and I did say this at the end, that I was so pleased by the summit, is because of the strength of the commitments that were undertaken and the absolute conviction and sincerity of these words would frankly lead anybody to have no doubt about whether these commitments are going to be kept. On the private sector commitments, pledges, these are very significant, and these companies, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, are certainly have committed their whole reputation to this. It's a very, very important move that really will change the landscape, because if they keep on having these donations on this rhythm, many of the controversial questions on how we ensure production of vaccines in LDCs, how we make sure that patents are sort of used also to liberalize the use of vaccines, well, they're still very important, but they somehow are less important. So I have no doubt. However, your question was also in the minds of many who spoke, who kind of vented the hypothesis that we might need a treaty, so a form more binding than this declaration. But I think a lot of work has to be done on that. The future is still open. Please.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, let's put it in two parts, the answer. The first one are indeed the pledges or the commitments that have been given today. And of course, in preparation of such a G20 summit, we work hard with different countries or with our European industrial partners to get these commitments. So they are well thought through, and they were public. So publicly said, BioNTech, Pfizer, that they committed to deliver 1 billion doses this year at non-profit for low-income countries and lower costs for middle-income countries. I think this is a very clear public statement. The same goes for 200 million this year from Johnson & Johnson and 100 million this year from Moderna. So the companies have very well thought about it and can be held accountable because they know that they have said that publicly. Same goes for Team Europe, pledging 100 million doses till the end of the year to be donated. Many of them through COVAX, not all of them, but many of them through COVAX. So here too, we feel responsible and accountable. And then the second part is the Rome Declaration. I think it is groundbreaking and really historical because you have for the very first time the G20. That is the United States and China, the European Union and Russia, India and Latin America, South Africa and many others, all of them committing to basic principles. At the beginning, the big principle of multilateralism that goes like a golden thread through the declaration. What is so important in there? Important is that this is a very clear no to health nationalism. And it is even reinforced if you look in the declaration. At a certain point, you found the principle that supply chains have to be open. So clear no to export bans, a clear no to bottlenecks. And all the countries I was mentioning, the G20, have agreed on that. Or another topic that is in the Rome Declaration is the commitment to the One Health principle. So for the very first time, there is the admittance that climate change, loss of biodiversity, and human activity expanding into wildlife is one of the breeding grounds or the forces that brings forward those pandemics. And these are principles where we from now on can build on. So we can refer to these principles, we can call for deliveries on these principles, and therefore I think this is a very important and groundbreaking day today.
Yeah, just to follow on your point, how we make sure that these commitments are going to be held in the future, clearly key will be the involvement of multilateral organizations like the WTO. The WTO is the forum where many of these issues are going to be discussed. The removal of export bans, the intellectual property rights, the ensuring the flow, the continuous flow of the supply chains of these medicines, which are quite complex. So we have discovered that the complete openness of boundaries is essential to provide, to produce vaccines, to produce them, as you can see from the pledges, in huge quantities, and to make sure they're going to be distributed to everybody. So WTO, WHO, the World Health Organization as well, there was a pledge or a manifested will to finance it, to make it more effective. So there are many interesting things, but certainly first of all, the assurance that these commitments are going to be held is in the strength of their words, in the sincerity of their words. The second, it's going to be in the hands of these organizations. Thank you.
We have a second question from Euronews, Giorgia Orlandi.
The EU has recently reached a deal on COVID-19 certificates to open up tourism across the continent, although it looks like it might take a while before these can come into effect. Now, with the summer season that is about to begin, I'd like to ask Prime Minister Mario Draghi, how is Italy planning to deal with such a delay? What's the impact in Italy? And I'd like to put a similar question to President von der Leyen, if she thinks it's a bit too late, and what's her take on this? Thank you.
Well, perhaps here, if you allow.
Please do. No, you answer first.
So, indeed, our goal is to be ready in June. This is, for us, important. We have good news that yesterday the political agreement has been achieved between the European Parliament and the Council, a precondition to move forward. Of course, there is hard work to do on the technical side, but we are right now in May in the process of doing test runs with the different member states. And I must say the member states have to do their homework on the technical side, what data are concerned. So most of them are ready. Not all of them are in time, but most of them. Italy is excellent in time, so that is good. And we are counting on starting in June, not in July, but in June, with the EU certificate. And it is a European contribution also to boost tourism again.
We, by the end of April, I can't remember the exact date, but the government's taken some important decisions about reopening the economy. And one of these decisions, taken either there or 10 days later, was to eliminate the quarantine for citizens coming from the Schengen area, from the UK, from the Emirates, from the United States. The second thing we did specific was to strengthen the so-called COVID-tested flights. And we have expanded that, in fact, to other cities in Italy. So we want the tourists back. We want them soon. Italy is open to the tourists of all the world, and that's the main message I want to send. There is going to be a green pass at European level. Italy will have its own green pass before, and we are coordinating with the Commission in order to have exactly the same, but in the meantime, we will have our national green pass, and that will also be helpful. But the key point is that we see that the general situation of the pandemic is improving. And that gives a lot of confidence and trust in the future. And that's the best, in a sense, the best way to welcome tourists from all the world. Thank you.
And now, Chico Harlan, Washington Post.
Thank you very much. I would welcome either of you to answer this. It's up to you. But, you know, certainly there was near unanimity today among all the leaders that the current inequities are unacceptable or problematic, even immoral. But you didn't hear anybody apologizing for their own decisions, and indeed they come from pretty understandable political imperatives to take care of your own citizens, and it maybe even has an element of human nature. So do you see anything in what unfolded today that would prevent that pattern from playing out again, you know, even with booster shots and with all the next rounds of demands that will take place even here across Europe? Does that pattern change, and should it change?
Thank you. Please, Ursula, you start.
Yes, it has to change, and it is changing. So if I may refer to what is needed to ensure equitable access. What we've seen is, first of all, of course, boost production. What we did intensively, and as Europeans, we went through the experience that it is doable to serve your own population, but also export. We have, over the last 5 months now, had on average 50% of the European production exported. Up to today, 50% have been exported. We have delivered to the European people around 230 or 240 million doses, and the same amount has been exported to 90 countries, COVAX included. That is the point number one. And this is also, of course, in the Rome Declaration that bottlenecks should be avoided and that we need open supply chains. Very important. But the point number one is, and this is a learning process also, we saw that also today, that this will not be enough. And therefore that we have to step up to increase manufacturing capacities in other regions of the world that are not typically producing vaccines. This is one of the initiatives, our learning process here of Team Europe, to systematically build up a vaccination or manufacturing capacity in different regions in Africa. So to build regional hubs, 1 billion will be invested. It's together with the member states and financial institutions, and of course our African partners. What is the system? It's building infrastructure. It is making sure that the industrial partners, the pharmaceutical companies, share knowledge and license and are involved in this building of capacities. Skilling people from university to dual vocational training. This is one of the bottlenecks. And of course, making sure that the supply chains are there. There are projects that have already started, like in South Africa or Senegal. Rwanda is also interesting. And I want to be very clear, it's also about bringing mRNA technologies to Africa. So this is also included. We have our, as I said, industrial partners. I think this is the most important stepping stone for the medium and long term. At the moment being in the short term, donations, export, sharing of vaccines, but this mechanism is over time not sustainable. Over time, you need more production or manufacturing facilities to be built up in these different regions.
Thank you, Ursula. May I add one point about, first, I would start where Ursula also started. If there is one part of the world that behaved just a little better than average, that was Europe. Even while we were starving for vaccines, we have thousands of people dying every day. We kept on exporting exactly as much as it was available for ourselves. Exporting also, furthermore, to countries that were blocking their exports. So that is the reality of our experience with this. There were people who used to say, not in Rome, in Brussels, we are dying of exports. So that was the perception at some point here now, not long ago, a month and a half ago. The other thing, Baselli, the message is we have understood, we all made mistakes, now it's time to repair. One of the things that people, we're not thinking about that now because we talk about vaccines, but there is another potential catastrophe here for poor countries, namely a sovereign debt catastrophe that's looming because these countries have been hit by the crisis, the economic crisis, because of the pandemic and also because of their weak conditions before the pandemic. So now what the international community and also the IMF, the World Bank are trying to do now is to set up a package which would somehow make the debt servicing conditions better. Namely, debt will have to be restructured, no questions about that. And there will have to be an extra distribution of special drawing rights for them. And next, and here is in a sense, drives us back to the point of sharing. The other point, important point, is whether we can share the special drawing rights of countries that don't need them with those who need them, which is a very big amount. Thank you.
Dana, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paola. So we will take a couple of questions from Brussels. I see several hands raised.
Where are you?
And please, let's give the floor first to Moritz Koch from Handelsblatt. Moritz, go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my question. A question for both President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Draghi. You already mentioned open supply chains more than once, that you have this commitment now in the G20 declaration. Have the UK and the US in particular committed to any concrete steps to make good on this commitment and to open up their supply chains? What do you expect them to do? And as a follow-up, how much of a problem for European manufacturers are those restrictions that the US has imposed still at this point?
Please, Ursula.
Thank you.
Yes, so it's very clear. The countries you mentioned have, as all G20, endorsed and signed the Rome Declaration. And you find it detailed out in the Rome Declaration what the supply chains are concerned. If I look into my papers, I can cite it to you. But indeed, it's the principle 4. The G20 commits to, I cite, open, resilient, diversified, secured, efficient, and reliable global supply chains. So this is agreed by all G20, and I think that is a big step forward. Now, we have indeed learned also our lessons what the interruption of supply chains is concerned. As you know, for example, to produce mRNA vaccines, I have learned that 280 components are necessary. So it is a very complex procedure. Our experience is wherever there is a blockage, it hampers the whole process, not only in the receiving country, but there are side effects into other countries too, which is then like a bouncing back effect to the country that started with blocking, for example, the flow of raw material or components. So it is not, it's in no one's interest. It is in our common interest to keep the supply chains up. And in that, we are in very good talks now with the UK and with the United States. So there is no blockage of raw material or components anymore.
I just want to make another point on this. It's, I wouldn't say easy, but it's, in a sense, more, how should I say, more, well, easy. It's easier to do these pledges now. And I'm pretty sure the US will ban their exports barriers, will take them off, will lift them off, because there's plenty of vaccines right now. Most of the population is being vaccinated, both in US and in Europe and in UK. So now there is availability for the rest of the world. And it's going to go like this until the next pandemic, until the next surprise. So we should use this time, and this is also in the declaration today, to make sure that somehow countries bind themselves not only on this occasion, but also in the future. And that's why multilateral organizations, which are institutions with a treaty, can be extremely helpful in the coming months in order to make sure that we don't repeat what's happened this time with poor countries. Thank you.
Thank you, President and Prime Minister. We take a second question from Brussels. Let me see the hands raised. Yes, the next one will be Frédéric Roard from l'Echo. Frédéric, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for the floor. First one would be the proposal of the IMF. They said that a 50 billion plan would be necessary to fight the pandemic. How do you see it? Is the European Union ready to do even more than what has already been announced? And a second question, if I may, for Mrs. van der Leyen, on the digital COVID certificate. As far as I understand, the Commission is working with the World Health Organization to ensure that this certificate can be recognized elsewhere in the world as well. Are you confident it will be the case in the near future? Thank you very much.
I think I leave the financial question to you.
And
I take the certificate.
You answer the certificate.
I take the certificate, indeed. Yes, WHO approved vaccines are recognized, and I'm not the perfect situation to explain all the technicalities, but the system, the European gateway system we established for our member states, has the ability that third countries plug in so that it's interoperable with other countries, third countries outside of the European Union. So the perspective is that over time we can not only apply the European certificate for the member states, but also for third countries that plug in with their data.
Thank you. We actually don't know whether 50 billions are the amounts that are needed. But even if it's so, there is a consistent, significant package that I hinted at before, which starts with the distribution of special drawing rights, then the redistribution of special drawing rights for the countries that have them, don't use them, can they lend it to the poor countries? Then we have a mechanism called IDA, International Development Aid Replenishment, and that this year all countries have committed to do bigger commitments in that pool. And then we have what I mentioned before, the debt restructuring, serious, quite significant. And then you have national and international and multilateral contributions, like the ones, if you think today a small country like Italy has pledged 300 million to the COVAX facility. and also has pledged 15 million vaccines in the donation pool. And certainly it's not the biggest pledge. And then you have the private sector that also is working actively, and frankly, it's not the last or the least important thing. So all this will help not only in the vaccine campaign, during the vaccine campaign, but also in laying out the infrastructure that will help poor countries to react better to the next pandemic. An infrastructure that starts, as Ursula just said, with the identification of production sites in Africa, for example. That's quite important. The transfer of technology, of know-how by the private sector, and then the production. But also in health infrastructure, and also on this there is ample agreement, in poor countries that needs to be helped to build. So today, I frankly have no doubt that what's needed will be found.
Grazie. E adesso c'è una domanda finale da parte della stampa italiana per Rai 3, Valentina Antonello.
Buonasera Presidente, buonasera anche a lei. Avete anticipato alcuni degli impegni di questa dichiarazione di Roma. Vi chiediamo, visto che spesso è accaduto che quel che è stato scritto poi sia rimasto solo una buona intenzione, come farete perché questo non accada, e soprattutto sui brevetti per i vaccini? Un punto della dichiarazione prevede la cessione volontaria della licenza. Ecco, come funzionerà e se ci sono già delle potenze mondiali che in questo senso si sono rese disponibili? Grazie.
Thank you. Grazie. La forza della dichiarazione di oggi viene prima di tutto dalla sincerità degli impegni presi. Era veramente apparente, era forse il desiderio di rimediare a delle ingiustizie, delle inequità che sono avvenute nel periodo più difficile, quando non c'erano vaccini per l'Europa, non c'erano ancora vaccini negli Stati Uniti, e per cui il ragionamento è stato chiudersi su se stessi e ignorare il resto del mondo. E le offerte che sono state fatte oggi dai vari Stati, come dicevo, noi abbiamo promesso 300 milioni di euro per il COVAX, cioè per comprare vaccini e darli gratuitamente. Ci sono altri paesi europei che hanno promesso ancora di più. Ci sono poi le donazioni di vaccini da parte dei vari paesi. Quindi, però, ora io non ho alcun dubbio che gli impegni presi in termini di, come dire, di aiuto ai paesi poveri in questa dichiarazione di Roma verranno mantenuti, ma è molto importante attrezzarsi per la prossima volta che avremo una pandemia che ci sorprenderà, in modo da evitare lo stesso egoismo che ha caratterizzato le nostre decisioni, non tanto quelle europee, a proposito, perché l'Europa ha continuato ad esportare metà della sua produzione altrove, a paesi che non la esportavano poi, come gli Stati Uniti, come il Regno Unito. Quindi non tanto l'Europa, ma anche l'Europa. Come saremo sicuri che reagiremo collettivamente con altruismo, senza egoismo? E questo è nelle mani anche delle organizzazioni multilaterali, l'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità, ma soprattutto l'Organizzazione Mondiale del Commercio, che è quella che avrà l'ultima parola sulla proprietà intellettuale, sui brevetti dei vaccini. Qui ci sono varie idee sui vaccini e tra un momento do la parola alla Presidente von der Leyen. Un'idea è quella semplicemente di fare una liberalizzazione temporanea, circoscritta dei brevetti. Questo ha un vantaggio di essere estremamente, diretto, semplice. Lo svantaggio è che non è sicuro che poi che dia la produzione che poi serve per vaccinare. Perché? Perché dopo bisogna produrli questi vaccini e la produzione è estremamente complessa, quindi occorre anche un trasferimento di tecnologia e di esperienza. Poi ci sono altre cose come per esempio la sospensione volontaria dei brevetti e poi c'è una particolare idea che c'è, se non sbaglio, nella dichiarazione di Doha, e qui do la parola alla Presidente perché è lei che ne ha parlato oggi durante il summit. So I'm talking about the compulsory licensing declaration.
Yes,
Please.
I will. I'm happy to
Oh,
do that.
you have the translation.
Yeah. But it was an excellent translation. So, of course, the voluntary licensing is the best way to ensure that necessary transfer of technology and know-how will go together with IP rights. Having said that, I think it is very interesting and a real step forward that today the global community, that is the G20, acknowledged the intellectual property is an instrument to boost manufacturing capacity. And what you find in the Rome Declaration is that the G20 committed to working on this subject thoroughly within the existing TRIPS agreement and the so-called Doha Declaration. So what is it all about? In the TRIPS agreement is already, and in the Doha Declaration, is already today foreseen a compulsory licensing as a perfectly legitimate tool in extraordinary situation, and a pandemic, of course, is an extraordinary situation. So it's already foreseen, the compulsory licensing is already foreseen in the TRIPS agreement with the Doha Declaration. This has been reconfirmed by G20 today. This is also important if you look at the parties that are convened in G20. Now, what the Prime Minister is referring to is that I've been listening very carefully to the developing countries. We had on Monday or Tuesday in Paris also with African leaders a summit on this topic. And they are complaining that it is difficult for them to use these flexibilities within TRIPS, within the Doha Declaration. And therefore, we think we have to act to provide the security and the certainty that developing countries can use the flexibilities in the TRIPS agreement. And therefore, the European Union will come forward with a proposal in WTO in early June to offer a third way that is also in support of the ideas the Director General of WTO, Dr. Ngozi, has. So our proposal, we have been discussing it yesterday in the Trade Council in the European Union, roughly will have three components. The first one we've been discussing already, that is trade facilitation and disciplines on export restrictions, so to make that sure also in WTO. Support for expansion of production, we've been talking about that. And indeed on IP, clarifying and simplifying the use of compulsory licenses in crisis times like a pandemic if necessary. What do I want to say by that? First of all, it's important that G20 has convened behind this Doha Declaration and the TRIPS agreement, that we work within it, with the flexibilities. Second, your question, how can you ensure that it's really going forward? We now take the initiative and bring the European proposal to the WTO table, where then the ambassadors in WTO will discuss and deal with it. So we move the whole topic forward, and I think this is one of the good outcomes of today.
Thank you, Ursula. L'ultima, in sostanza, questo è stato il primo passo. Questo summit è stato molto importante per la forza e la sincerità degli impegni, ma anche perché è stato caratterizzato da effettivi, concreti impegni in termini di dosi di vaccini e di finanziamenti per distribuire i vaccini ai paesi poveri. Ma è il primo passo. Il lavoro continuerà poi per noi tutto quest'anno nel G20 e negli altri consessi internazionali. Quello che traspare da oggi è che c'è un gran desiderio di continuarlo e di arrivare a risultati che non solo sono concreti per l'immediato, ma rimarranno fermi anche per il futuro. Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We close this press conference. Thank you, President. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, everybody.
So, Mario.
Grazie, Ursula.
Thank you.
It was good.
What's happening?
Bene. Ok, ciao ciao.
Se si mette, ok, so we can take off the mascherina. Ancora no, tra un paio di mesi, dai.
Ti chiamo dopo? Ciao.
Ok, ciao. Thank you. You were very good.
No, it's the combination whenever there's finance, I push it to